How's it going?
Hey, how you doing?
Good. It's just the two of us.
Yeah, I don't know if I hope she's not fashionably late. I saw her grading some of my stuff, so she may be doing that before we start.
Sounds good.
Mhm.
Hi,
How's it going?
great. How's it going?
You know,
It's
here on a,
going.
here on a Sunday afternoon.
Mhm.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, yeah. Hi. Are y'all done with y'all's assignments?
Oh yeah. Oh, and also if we start chatting on, it's recording, so just a FYI.
Okay.
But yeah, I've completed my assignments. I saw that that's I guess a requirement for her to complete the readings and assignments before we attend this. So
Mhm.
Ah. Hi everyone, how are you guys doing? Yay, I got people to come. This is kind of an experiment. So, I know in the program that you guys aren't required to have synchronous visits like this, but I've always found that they're really helpful, and especially for classes like this. where there are lots of new ideas that are presented, for us to have a space to really talk about them, for you guys to, really, have it soak in, because I imagine that some of these ideas are going to be kind of different, thinking about disability from a social work view, whenever we're so used to thinking about it from a medical model. So thank you for taking me up on this and coming today. I'm going to put a link in the chat for you guys if you want to follow along with my slides. I usually don't have many words and things on my slides, but it helps me to stay on track. And it helps, I think, students to have a visual, not to just have to look at my face the whole time. So I will pull that up just to help us stay on track with the topics I want to make sure that we cover today. But like I said, you can use them, to kind of structure your notes and things, but don't feel like you're going to miss a whole lot if you don't have the slides, because they're really just markers for us. On that note, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. Give me 1 second, and I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can everybody see it okay? Yeah, we'll do a thumbs up. After so many months of Zooming, I've only recently learned how to make reactions on Zoom, like how you can make smiley faces and thumbs ups and things. Had no clue how to do that until just recently. But we can use that today, if I'm kind of talking and ask a question, you can do thumbs up. Feel free to just jump in since we're a smaller group too. I think we shouldn't have any problems with anybody unmuting themselves with feedback and things like that that we have with larger groups. So anytime you have something, don't hesitate to jump in. So what I'd like for us to do first is, each time that we do meet, to have a check-in, and this is kind of how, we can structure participation too. I'd like for, whenever we do have these meetings, for you to be as engaged as possible. But I also understand that you might have other things going on. Like, for instance, this is a very rare moment in my home where there isn't a bunch of ruckus going on in the background, because I have a 7-year-old and I have a 3-year-old. And we have a cat who usually stays out of my business, but she might make an appearance. So there usually is a lot going on. So, and if you need to get up to, go use the restroom, or even just to not be sitting anymore, this is a very open space. So I do want you guys to keep your video on, just so that I know that you are there, but you don't have to be in the frame. You can walk around, make yourself comfortable. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with some introductions. I think that I know pretty much all of you, except for maybe Demond. I don't think that I've met you before. Kate, I'm not sure if you've been in one of my classes before. And then Aaron, have you been in my class before? Your name sounds familiar, but the others, like Samaria, Shalita, and Stephanie, I recognize you guys. Yeah. So we're about half and half of knowing each other. Do you guys know each other in this group from being in other classes? No. And Zamaria, you've been in the program a long time. You don't know any of these cats? No? You've been doing this since like 2018?
19. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know any of y'all, but hey.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to know each other then. I've been at LSU since 2017, teaching in the online program. I have been at LSU since I was 18, though. I got my undergrad at LSU, I got my MSW there, and my PhD. So I definitely have, tiger's blood. I bleed purple and gold. Although I'm not really a big sports person. The only time I've ever really gotten into sports is when I was teaching on campus, and I taught a lot of undergrads who were athletes, and they'd be like, "Hey, Dr. G, did you see my game?" And I'd be like, no, I don't really watch football or basketball, but I started getting into it for them. So for those of you who don't know me, this is really my area of practice is developmental disabilities. And you have obviously noticed in your readings that the language that we'll be using in this class and that I'm starting to use more professionally is a neurodiversity model to disability. So considering disability in a diversity framework rather than a pathology framework. And, that's something that's new for me even since the last time I taught this course in 2019, is that I've really infused it more with some of that terminology because I think that it is more of the social work perspective on disability is considering it in the realm of diversity. Rather than something that needs to be treated or something that needs to be solved or fixed, that it's not something that's always a problem, that it's something that is a part of human nature, though, and that it's something that everyone can experience on a continuum. What got me interested in this field is that when I was in undergrad, I worked with a group of psych doc students, actually. I was a volunteer for them to be a behavioral therapist for little preschoolers who were on the autism spectrum. And it was a new program. It was right when applied behavior analysis was becoming really popular. And we had more data, to show its effectiveness. And it was becoming very popular in Louisiana. And it's when I realized that I really like working with this population. And so I got a job in the field as a paraprofessional and have really kind of just focused on that with my research and my studies. And I've had the opportunity to work with some great nonprofits here in Baton Rouge that have developed new services for people who are on the spectrum and, their family members. A lot of my experience is with autism, but I do have other, experiences with different types of neurodivergence. So I've, worked with clients who have Down syndrome or intellectual disability. I've also worked with a lot of clients who have ADHD or some sort of, cognitive disability per se. So even though a lot of my background is in autism, I have some other experiences too. One thing that I'll share with you guys now that's kind of part of the course too, if you read the welcome letter, I shared with you guys that I personally have been diagnosed with ADHD before, and that, it's something that I think is really important for teaching this course, to really teach about neurodiversity. A lot of scholars in the field feel that you have to be neurodivergent yourself to fully be able to teach others. And to be able to really do that, you also have to be vulnerable and disclose your neurodivergence. And so that's what I'm doing here today for you guys. I've been diagnosed with ADHD, the inattentive type, and I was diagnosed in adulthood, and it was so surprising to me. It was like this fog was lifted, and all of the things that I just thought were flaws that I had, you know, that maybe I was lazy or that I was just kind of slow or ditzy, you know, kind of all came together and made sense. And I've seen that for a lot of my clients too, whether it's ADHD or getting an autism diagnosis later in life. A lot of my clients in my private practice are actually moms or dads of kids who have gotten an autism diagnosis, and then they realize, oh, this kind of fits, you know, like I had similar experiences whenever I was younger. And so it is something that you see, you know, people learning more about this and getting a diagnosis in adulthood. Also, you know, I'm sharing to open this up to you guys. If you feel comfortable to share your own neurodivergences, you don't have to. It's not something that's required at all. But for you guys to know that it's something that is safe to talk about, to share, and to process here, and that it'll be a constructive conversation if you do choose to share. And also, you know, for you to understand that accommodations will be a little different in this course. If you've had me before, you know that I'm probably not a normal professor, that I usually work with my students a lot more than some professors. And that is partially due to my neurodivergence, because I know that lots of students may need extra time on assignments or may need, you know, what's considered an accommodation, but for whatever reason, you know, going through the Office of Disability Services is not going to work for them. I personally think that it's a very classist and ableist system to make students go through the Office of Disability Services, but that's just my own personal soapbox. So I try to be more accommodating. So if there is something that, you know, you are feeling like we could do to help you to learn better in the class or to feel more comfortable in the setup, just let me know, and I'm open to that. What we'll find though is that sometimes in accommodating one student, then we have to collectively, you know, as a group, accommodate together. So sometimes this might become a conversation for the group. But I'm going to stop talking now, and I'm going to let you guys talk, and just introduce yourself and tell me what brought you to this class, what area of the country you live in, and yeah, just a little bit about yourself and where you're in the program. Who wants to go first? Shalita, you look like you unmuted yourself. You willing to be our first?
Yes, I'll go first. So my name is Shalita McKenzie, and I am in, I think I have maybe like 3 or 4 more modules left in the program. Yes, and I just forgot just that quick what else I was supposed to talk about.
What brought you to the class, and where you're located?
Okay, so I'm located in New Orleans, Louisiana, and what brought me to the class is that my sister-in-law, she has an autism diagnosis, and so I wanted to just learn how to be more empathetic, and I also wanted to learn how to better accommodate the clients that I work with. So I work with children and families, but the clients that are, I guess our initial client or the main client is the child, because they come in with a referral, and you know, they may have behavioral issues. Some are diagnosed with autism, and some like medical issues. But yeah, I just wanted to learn more and just, you know, do a better job with working with them.
Yeah, that's great. So your clients have kind of brought you to the class. What setting do you work in right now?
Right now, like I'm a wraparound facilitator, so we used to go out to the homes and hold meetings, like, and set goals for the families, and we'll write plans for them, and just kind of check in and see where they are, and just wrap services around them. So now I'm working virtual, so we kind of do all that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, great. So you work in wraparound services, and now with COVID, it's been more virtual. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Thanks for sharing.
Okay, I'll go next. My name is Amon Roberts. This is my fourth module, so I have 4 modules left. And I took this class because I'm currently interning at the psych unit in Kinder, and I'm from Bow Ridge, Louisiana. So a lot of the psychiatric patients, they have disabilities. So sometimes, especially when I was watching those videos, sometimes they diagnose patients with like with like disabilities, and it's something so they have mental health issues. So and I wouldn't like as understanding of the diagnosis and stuff. So taking this class helps me better understand disabilities, especially sometimes I am a part of those stereotypes. Like people with disabilities, why they can't work when they appear that nothing is wrong. So it's like just because they're not physically handicapped doesn't mean that they're not disabled. So I was interested in learning more about it.
Yeah, it's so thank you for sharing that, Damon. I think that you're so spot on for a lot of the things that you just said. And I'm so glad that you decided to sign up for the class since you've been seeing this and where you're working, and want to learn more for your clients. It's a pretty common issue that people who have developmental disabilities do have co-occurring mental health, issues, and so they present in inpatient settings a lot of times. And unfortunately, in our geographic area, I'm in Baton Rouge. Not a lot of the psychiatric units have are prepared for that. Across the country, there's different models that have been implemented for like mobile mental health crisis units. But here in Louisiana, we don't have as many resources for that. We don't have as many dual diagnosis in the mental health and developmental disability sense. And I think that we'll probably hit on a lot of the things that you mentioned in this class. And definitely remind me while we're having these conversations to circle back to your question or kind of inquiry about, what are the reasons why people need to be on disability, and what is that like? Because that's something that, just theoretically talking about the reasons, but then also the practicalities of it too, we can talk about, because that's really important for clients too, to understand what their benefits are in this particular field. And with my private clients, I see a lot of people who think, oh, I don't need disability because I'm not disabled. I just only work 10 hours a week, and that's because my nerves are bad or whatever. It's like, okay, well, that's exactly what this is for. That's exactly what disability is for. So having to educate people and to kind of destigmatize, asking for that help, because that's what it's there for. And people have paid into this, rightfully so, too. And they deserve their benefits. Yeah. Thanks for sharing, Damon. All right.
I can jump in.
Okay.
All right. I'm Aaron. I'm in Ithaca, New York, where the high was 50 today.
Nice.
So I chose this class because I know very little about this area. I work for a day treatment program, and it's interesting that to hear you use the term co-occurring disorder, because we use the term co-occurring disorder to reference mental health and substance use.
I think I just made that comment on one of your posts. I was just looking at some of y'all's writing before we jumped on, and that was one of my comments. I'm assuming your dual diagnosis is substance abuse and mental health, right? That's how it is most places. Unless you specialize in this area, you wouldn't ask that. You would assume it's substance abuse.
And so, yeah, and I do have a handful of clients who are on the autism spectrum disorder, autism spectrum. And to be honest, I've probably been pretty ineffective with a lot of them. And so I'm hoping to learn a little bit more. Yeah, that's me.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I'm curious, what do you think, why do you say that you think you've been ineffective with them?
I mean, for any other reason why you'd be ineffective with someone, if you don't have a good sense of, what's going on with them, if you don't have a sense of how they're processing the world and what their interactions mean, then it can be tough to have an appropriate response. So I can't think of something specific where where I crossed some sort of boundary that I shouldn't have, but but I still think
the reason I ask is that I think a lot of people who have had some experience or interactions with autistic people in their practice feel like they've done a disservice to them in some way. And I know I can speak personally and say I have done my clients a disservice before, particularly when I was young, even before I was a social worker, because I just believed anything people told me, about what was best. And I know that I personally had a view of authority that was, well, if this is what the evidence-based treatment is, then this is what I'm supposed to do. And really, a lot of treatments for autism or interventions have discounted the internal experience of people who are autistic because we're so focused on their behavior. And so that's something that I've learned myself, that as I've worked more and more with this population, my work has changed and my style has changed. And so I don't think it's so uncommon to feel that way, especially in the beginning when you might not have as much information. And I'm fully aware that this class is not highly full. So this could have been like whatever class was left for some of you, like with scheduling, that's totally fine. I'm not going to hold that against you.
That wasn't the case. If I get a choice of what I'm going to take, I'd rather not take some, like one of them was crisis intervention.
Yeah.
And I've just done that for so long that it probably would have been my valley. But I mean, like right now I'm on call because my county has a mobile crisis team. So we go out with, we partner with suicide prevention and the law enforcement agencies. And so we go out whenever it might be indicated that someone should be hospitalized instead of arrested or whatever, intoxicated, whatever. So no, I was not forced.
Been there, done that. Yeah. I feel the same way about crisis intervention. If I were in your position in these classes, I probably would have done the same thing. I used to be the instructor who taught crisis intervention mostly. And strangely enough, I got one of my best friends in to teach it, and we met each other when we were in undergrad, and we were volunteers together at a crisis hotline. And so that's like how we got into social work and things. We've never had a mobile crisis team here that I know of, unless it's like through the police department. But that would be so cool, and it's very needed. It's so important for diverting people out of other systems like jail and the hospital. Yeah. Thanks for sharing, Erin. Glad to have you here. All right.
I guess I'll go next. Hey everyone, I'm Zamaria Frank. Dr. D, you said my name wrong a couple of times, but
I
that's
did.
cool. Yes, ma'am. Zamaria.
Zamaria. Okay. Yes.
Yes, ma'am. I'm in Southern Maryland. This is actually my last module of the program. Like Dr. D said, I've been in the program for a couple of years. I've took this class, one, because there wasn't many options for electives, and this is actually one of my third electives. But it was interesting how the class was worded, neurodivergent disorders, and I recognize that because in the DSM, that is how all these disorders are combined. So I know in other classes, they kind of touch on neurodevelopmental disorders, but this class is really just focusing on it. So thought that would be an interesting class for me to take. And then on the licensing exams, they can test us on things regarding autism, all the neurodivergent developmental disorders. So it's really good for us to take this class in that regard. So yep. So
I'm glad to have you here in the course. And you're right. It's a little unusual to even have the opportunity to take a developmental disabilities class. And the DSM has started grouping them differently and using some of this new language slowly but surely. All right. Thanks. All right, I think Stephanie and Kate, you're our last ones hanging.
So my name's Kate. I just recently moved to Baton Rouge from South Louisiana, a small town. I am currently interning with palliative medicine. I interned previously with the outpatient inpatient psych unit, and I'm currently I've been working for an early childhood program. And through early childhood, really seeing a lot of developmental disorders and seeing a lot of physicians not doing families justice by really getting down to what's going on with children. So many children we come across that are nonverbal and are like 4 years old and have just been told, oh, it's normal, they'll grow out of it, you know? So really I wanted to take this class just to learn a little bit more. I really just have pretty much no knowledge at all of, developmental disabilities. Also have a couple of relatives with autism. So I think it would be really good just to kind of get to know their perspective a little bit more. And so far, just this week, I've learned so much that I just had no idea about. So I think this class will be really good.
Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing, Kate. And some of the things that you brought up that haven't been brought up yet about early intervention are so important. And I think it's module 3 that you'll have some readings that are about that. And what you were just describing is often called just waiting, or anticipatory, like, or the watch and wait approach to things. And that happens to a lot of younger kids, because people don't want to put a label on kids that young. And so it's kind of a double-edged sword, of, okay, so we're trying to rule things out and, not to over diagnose, but then at the same time, if we're not being discriminate enough, then people are not getting the help that they need. And the reality, at least in our geographic area, is that there aren't enough services for all the kids. So there aren't enough providers who are qualified to even diagnose autism in our region, in our state. And so if you can imagine that problem trickles into intervention too, with, now we have more and more ABA clinics, particularly, that are opening now that insurance will reimburse for that, and Medicaid does now. But even 10 years ago, there was just a huge shortage of providers too. So we'll definitely be talking about that. All right, Stephanie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie, and I live in Oregon. I live on the coast, and I have one module left after this one, so I'm almost done too. And yeah, I just finished up my internship at a refugee agency, which was a really amazing experience. And I was drawn to this class kind of like everyone else. I just don't know enough about it. And I just know that it's going to apply to any area that I work in. And it's just the neurodiversity idea is really interesting to me. And I think it just really fits well with social work. So I'm excited to learn more.
Yeah. All right. Great. Thanks for sharing. Have I missed anybody, or did I catch everybody? I think I've got everybody who's on here. And just to remind you guys, I think we have at least one person who's not here with us today. And I know that, you're not required to be here. It is, more to your advantage to be here, because it'll be easier for your grading and assignments and things to kind of check off your participation for being here today. But if you're not able to come, there is an option for you to watch the recording afterwards. And once I post the recording, I'll also post some discussion questions from what we talked about, that you would be asked to write about. So you would be basically turning in a short paper instead of coming to the lesson, or to the lecture. Because a lot of what we'll do is, like today, you'll see that there are some topics that we're kind of going to talk around, and there will be very little new information that I'm giving you, because most of it is coming from what you've been reading and the trainings that you've been doing. But there will be some new information. So like for today, for instance, when we talk about neurodiversity and related terminology, we're really going to be kind of working through how to use this terminology. I think some of you had some questions in, your responses with the work that you've done so far too, about, so how do we use this word, or what's included under this umbrella of neurodiversity? We'll get into that today. So these meetings are more, you're not going to learn a whole lot of new information, but it's really to reinforce and to kind of tie things together for you. So you may wonder sometimes, like, why am I reading this? And then after you watch this video or you come to the lecture, it'll make sense. Well, this is where we kind of put the pieces together. All right, so I have explained that part of the course. Has everybody had a chance to look at the syllabus yet? Okay. It's so unusual that I only have 8 people in this class, and none of you have emailed me this week. I'm like, are they alive? But I'm like, I guess I gave great instructions. But I went back and I did notice in my syllabus that I messed up the dates a little bit. And I went back and I'll post the revised syllabus that I've worked on, but it basically has made it so that we're going to have 4 meetings like this. We won't have 5, we'll have 4 through weeks 1 through 4. So that last week we won't have a meeting. There will just be 4. And that way that gives people who don't have the opportunity to come to have a few days to watch and to answer the questions. And those are due on the Thursday after. So like for you guys, I'll enter your grade right after we're done since you're here. But for people who aren't able to come, who are going to do the writing option, it gives them a little bit of time to do that. And time for me to upload the video for them and logistics. So, but that's the only thing that I saw that I wanted to clarify, because I knew that was a little confusing. Did you guys have other questions after looking at the syllabus about what to expect? Okay, and how was it this week with the trainings and with like the amount of work?
It was more than I would have done in a week with a full term.
Yeah.
It was a lot of reading, and it was a lot of work, but I did a little bit every day.
Okay. And some of this is that this is a 5-week module now too, so that's why it is a little bit more condensed. Some of it also is that we don't have a textbook in this class, which I did on purpose because you guys don't want to spend more money on textbooks. And a lot of this information can be open source, and this helps you to learn where this information is too. So once you're in the field, knowing, what are the organizations that put out information about developmental disabilities, about autism, because the information is always changing too. So, all right. So, and just to clarify, your grade is really based on your participation, and then the biggest chunk of your grade is just doing the activities. And I would say that this week is the heaviest on like the trainings and things. The only other week that may have as much is the last week, but that's the week that we won't be meeting. So it's kind of a trade-off with that. So, all right. Seems like y'all are all cool with the syllabus and the setup. Am I reading that right? Okay. So I have this set up for us to meet for 2 hours. Some days we may not go the whole 2 hours, but I wanted to make sure that you scheduled for that. But I think that today we're probably going to be pretty close. So the things that I want us to go over today are, listed up here. I want us to talk about what your perceptions of autism are. So just kind of coming into the class, what are the things that you already know or what you've heard? And then we'll talk about the models of disability. That was a big topic that came up in the readings and the trainings. We'll talk a little bit about the pathological and the medical model of things, and how, the neurodiversity model is more of a social critical model of disability. We'll talk about neurodiversity and what are all of the words and acronyms and things. And then the last thing we'll talk about is how this all aligns with social work and with our our core values, because I gave you a couple of readings to look at that were written by social workers, and they kind of highlight, this new paradigm shift of, moving from a medical model to a neurodiversity one. All right. So I'm going to move us along. We already did this. I didn't show y'all this page. So this is my little page that I usually show people whenever I'm doing a presentation and things. I guess I didn't talk much about my personal stuff. I shared with you guys in one of my emails that this is going to be an interesting module for me, because I am in a rent house right now because my house that I own flooded a few weeks ago. And so it's like, completely gutted right now. And as you can imagine, it's quite an event to go through. So that's, personally, you might see that pop up if I'm a little late with posting something, or if you have sent me an email and I've missed it, just send me another email. It's kind of a chaotic time, but things are getting back to normal more and more every day. I have a cat. She'll probably show up with coronavirus. I've been learning with the pandemic and when we were in lockdown and things, my goal for myself was to learn guitar, and I'm slowly getting there. I make jewelry, I make art, I do art journaling. That's what all of these other little pieces are about. I'm in Louisiana. My other interests professionally are crisis intervention. This is the picture I always like to use for crisis intervention, with the person reaching out of the water. I also have gotten to have some really great experiences with working with nonprofits and doing consulting for nonprofits in the field of developmental disabilities and all sorts of social services. And then for those of you who've taken me before, you know that I'm kind of techie. I make my students do a lot more techie things than most people, most professors do, because I really get into that and enjoy it, and like finding new ways that we can connect with each other in this kind of asynchronous setup, because I just see it as a creative challenge. So, all right. We did our course overview. So in the chat box for just, a few minutes, I want you guys, it doesn't even have to be like full sentences, but what are some words, what are some things that you think of whenever people say the word autism? Okay, these are some good ones. So you guys have pinpointed a lot of the diagnostic criteria from the DSM. Have you guys all taken differential diagnosis yet? Yeah, okay. So you guys know that the DSM-5 has a newer definition of autism than it had in the past definition, maybe, depending on who taught the course, I guess. But really, it's been a big shift from the DSM-4 TR to the current version of the DSM-5. They've collapsed categories of different criterias. So whereas before there were 3 groups of or 3 categories of criteria. Now they have condensed that down to 2, and they have added diagnoses such as social communication disorder, which are very similar to autism spectrum disorder, but they don't have as much of the repetitive behaviors. So it's more of the social kind of language side of things. What you'll learn and what you probably have seen in the readings is that all of this is very subjective. Any kind of disorder that is put in the DSM has some subjectivity to it. And the DSM has actually been, has had things that we would never call disorders now in it in the past. In very early iterations of the DSM, there were, disorders of slaves that would run away from their owners. That was Dropotopia. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but it was actually considered a valid diagnosis. And now that seems horrific, and like we could never imagine that happening. But an even more recent example is homosexuality, that used to be considered a disorder. And so really, when we look at the neurodiversity movement kind of on the surface, we think that might be a little bizarre to think that, okay, people with ADHD or autistic people, that's normal, and that is on, a continuum of normal, because we have really treated these conditions as a medical issue for so long, and have treated them like things that can be cured or things that can be treated. When in actuality, these conditions, what we know about them is that they're lifelong, that usually people with autism experience autism their whole entire lives, that it's not something that just shows up one day. It's something that's part of who they are. That's something that gets a little tricky with differential diagnosis. So particularly with people who have complex trauma, so especially early traumas when they were younger, it can be hard to differentiate whether it is trauma that has led to certain behaviors, or is it something that was already there at birth. And then with that particular topic, there's also the added uncertainty of, are people who are neurodivergent more likely to be abused and more likely to encounter interpersonal traumas than neurotypical people? And so it's really a hard area to research because of those questions. All right, let's see. So we went over some of the key diagnostic criteria you've hit on. So the communication is a big one, and then the repetition that goes with the repetitive movements, stereotyped movements. Sometimes that behavior is called stimming, and it also is related to sensory perception in a lot of situations. So, you may see an autistic child twirling or putting their fingers in front of their eyes, kind of like this, or even doing things like wanting to lick people or wanting to run and hug people real tight. All of those things are related to sensory perception, and that's something that gets cut out of the definition of autism pretty often, but is very important. And a lot of the research that's emerging is really showing that a lot of the characteristics of autism, there's some underlying sensory perception issue that people with autism either perceive different experiences more intensely, or either more intensely or not as intense. So there are some children or people on the spectrum who may have really high pain tolerances. So there was one little kid at the preschool that I was volunteering at that had ant bites all over his legs because he had been standing in an ant pile and didn't realize it, wasn't feeling the ants bite him. An adult had to help him, and tell him that it was happening. And then on the other hand, you may experience people who are on the spectrum who have really high sensitivity to pain. So maybe they, aren't able to, they're able to feel things that you would think you can't possibly feel that. So, for example, one thing that comes up a lot is your ears. So I've had several clients who have been convinced that there is something in their ear. There's something they're perceiving in their ear to be very itchy, very irritating. But after going to the ENT, once a month, sometimes, realizing that it's something that person's perceiving, but there's no medical reason or medical cause that can be seen. And so a lot of times those things are written off, as, oh, that person has autism, they don't know what they're saying, or there's no medical reason. Usually they're perceiving something, and a lot of times that can be related to sensory perceptions. All right, verbal versus nonverbal. We'll talk about that a little bit, especially next week, because there is a whole subgroup of autistic people who are non-speakers, and so those non-speakers generally use different types of communication to communicate. So some may use sign language, some may use AAC, like a computer, to be able to communicate. Others, are able to communicate verbally sometimes or with certain people, but not regularly, or they choose not to. There's lots of variation in communication. All right, and specific interests, that's another one that kind of goes with the repetition, that kind of goes with that that category of criteria, and also something to note and to know moving forward in our readings, that specific interests are really a great point of entry into an autistic person's world, and a great way to connect with autistic people is by figuring out what are the things that they're into. I've learned about so many things that I never thought I would learn about, because I've had clients who know all about it, like DuckTales, or different. I know so much more about Disney Pixar than I ever thought I would, and it's pretty remarkable what with the particular gifts that people on the spectrum that I've met have, with remembering dates, with remembering the sequence of things, and really having a gift and a knack for animation in particularly. But really, there are lots of different specific interests, and sometimes you might not even realize that it's a specific interest. So an example I like to give a lot is, and we'll talk about this next week more, about how girls are often misdiagnosed and are often not diagnosed as early as boys are, because a lot of our research is based on white boys. That's what the subject has generally been in research, is white boys. So we don't know a whole lot about kids who are from more diverse backgrounds, and about girls. And one of the special interests that examples is Barbies, actually. So this particular young girl was really into Barbies, and it seemed like a very developmentally appropriate thing for this little girl to do, to play with the Barbies. And nobody was really concerned about the play because she was a girl and she was playing with Barbies, and that's what girls do. But if you got down on that level with the little girl, you realize that she wasn't really playing typically with her Barbies. She was winding them up. She was undressing them and dressing them, but in a way that was, I'm putting all green things on my Barbie. I'm putting all yellow things on my Barbie. I'm winding them up. None of the Barbies talk to each other. None of the Barbies were engaged in pretend play. It was all about dressing up the Barbies and winding them up in a particular way. That kind of systemic kind of approach to things is a very autistic thing. That's something that is a tendency that you can see often, but like any kind of tendency, there's always exceptions too. So, but something to think about. So that little girl was kind of overlooked because on the surface it looked like, oh, she's into Barbies, and really she was into categorizing Barbie clothes is what she was into, which is a little bit more, gives us more information about her perception and her internal world. All right, you guys did great with this. Did I miss any that you guys want to talk about some more? Nope. Okay. All right, let's go to the next slide. I went backwards. Okay, so the models of disability. So for this, what are some of the models that you guys remember hearing about in the readings and the trainings? What are some words that come to mind?
Medical model. Social model.
Yeah, medical model, social model. This is one that wasn't in the readings particularly, but have you guys ever heard critical theory, or what critical theory is? This might have come up in your diversity classes. Neurodiversity, it could be considered like a feminist or a critical theory too, because it's not only pointing things out, but also about the individual, but showing how the environment also goes into play. And that's really what neurodiversity does, is kind of take into account a person's environment and takes the blame per se, or the focus off of the individual and looking at the whole system. And so I think about this in my clinical practice a lot. The first few times I meet with families or with adults, the focus is usually on the person with the disability. So, oh, his problem, her problem, how she's affecting our family. And by a few sessions in, it's more of how this is a family problem. It's not a person problem. It's a family issue that needs to be addressed. And how can we all pitch in to understand each other better? A lot of the research in the field is really moving towards, the communication issues that come up with autism being a two-way problem. So it's actually a problem of neurotypical people interacting with neurodivergent people. And whenever neurotypical people are communicating with neurotypical people, there aren't problems. And then also when neurodivergent people communicate with other neurodivergent people, we don't have the same problems that come up as when neurodivergent people and neurotypical people interact. It's something that's also called the double empathy problem, which you may hear, or, when you think about autism, think of it being a condition where people can't have empathy. And that's really a myth about autism. It's really a different type of empathy. Most of the people that I know who are autistic are very empathetic, but there are misfires in communication a lot of times that make it seem like they're not caring and not understanding. So that, is just one example of the research that's kind of come from the social model of disability. So moving from, the focus being on the person to it being on a society issue. So moving from just awareness to more of acceptance of these issues. So I think a couple of you have said that you've worked with people who are on the spectrum, and Kate, you mentioned working with littles, so you probably have more experience with parents. So some of this paradigm shift in the history of autism, we can't ignore the family impact of things. And in one of your readings that was about social work and autism, that was one of the main points, is that social workers really are uniquely trained to work with families, and that there is a family impact with developmental disabilities. And historically, families have kind of led the conversation, namely parents have. And you still see some of the struggle, I guess would be the right word, of understanding between those two groups, because what has really come up in the autistic community is that, there are advocates that are autism moms, so moms or parents of people on the spectrum, of kids on the spectrum, maybe kids who aren't able to advocate for themselves yet, and then actually autistic adults who have been the kid before and they're grown up. And so sometimes those two groups of advocates kind of clash in some of their ideas. There are some, adherents to the neurodiversity model that are very extreme and, are way on, an extreme end of, neurodiversity. And then there's also, people in the medical model who are very extreme on the other end. For social workers, I think it's really important for us to understand both sides, because we're going to work with both the parents, we're going to work with adults, we're going to work with kids, and to really understand their perspectives. And in my experience with working with parents, they are some of the most motivated, badass people I've ever met, really. They have so much energy and so much passion for their kids. It's really incredible. And they're not willing to put up with or to accept anything less than what their kids deserve. And how awesome to have a parent like that in your corner, right? Not everybody gets parents like that. And that's not to say that every kid with autism has a parent like that, but this is kind of that subtype that we're talking about right now, of an autism mom, or, that I think that a lot of times people in that group are parents of people with developmental disabilities. They have their own stereotypes that are put on them. And so it's something to be aware of. All right. So does everybody feel comfortable with the ideas of social medical models of disability? All right. So, neurodiversity in related terms. So, I'm just going to give you a few little pointers on this, and I'm going to send you another document that I found that might help you as we're going through, like as a reference for things. So, neurodiversity is the main idea, right? What you'll see in a lot of writings when people are actually referring to neurodivergence will use the word neurodiversity. So neurodiversity is the idea that disability can be understood as a normal part of diversity, and that that it's a normal part of a human condition to have autism or to have ADHD, that falls on a continuum of normal. What neurodivergence means is that based on what social norms are, that the person deviates from what the social norm is. And that is all can be very subjective and depends on the culture, depends on the location of the person, but any kind of divergence, so moving away from the norm. So if you were to say, like in our group right now, that we probably have a neurodiverse group. There's probably neurotypical people, and there's definitely at least one neurodivergent person here. So we're neurodiverse because there's a mix of different neurotypes in one place. We would say that I am neurodivergent because I've told you that I have ADHD. That's generally considered a type of neurodivergence. There's a lot of literature and arguments out there about what is considered neurodivergence versus not. In general, autism, ADHD, learning differences, so dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, all of the big learning disorders are generally considered neurodivergence. Also, there can be acquired neurodivergences, so especially as you get older, dementia, that is something that people will consider neurodivergence. All different types of neurodivergences. I think that, Aaron, I read in your write-up somewhere that you wondered about your clients in the dual diagnosis clinic with having a mental health condition and a substance abuse disorder or problem with substance use. Damon, you mentioned that a lot of your clients in inpatient psych, also have a neurodivergence. So that's something that it's really common. And in general, it's any kind of deviance or divergence from the norm. There are other scholars who will who propose that mental illness and mental health also is part of neurodivergence. So when we think about psychosis and thought disorders, that there's also a lot of subjectivity about what is psychosis, what is a delusion. I come across that a lot with my autistic clients who also present with some sort of psychosis, or they've been diagnosed with having some sort of psychotic episode. You always have to think about the perception of the person and who decides what's normal, what's not. That all kind of feeds into these definitions. So, any questions about the terms that you saw this week when you were reading and looking at these trainings? Got it. All right. And if you guys ever have questions that come up while you're reading, or questions that you want me to address whenever we come together during this time, feel free to do that. And I will, kind of structure, things so that I make sure that we answer that question. It's the same kind of reason that I like to get to know you guys a little bit better so I can know what kind of examples and what kind of readings are going to be most relevant for you guys and what y'all are doing. So, all right. Okay. And then to me, this is kind of the most exciting topic for this week. So, all of you have gone through, most of the program at this point and have learned about the core values of social work. What do you guys think about how this fits with both what you have learned so far, what you've seen in your practice? So what do you think social workers should be doing, and what have you observed about this field?
I know we're supposed to, we were supposed to advocate for more access to care for people who are neurodivergent, when it comes to policy, working in a clinical or organization providing services to neurodivergent people. We're called to advocate for them in multiple areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a charge for us to be advocates. Yeah.
And in the setting that I work in, I feel like we've used the medical and social model for people who are neurodivergent. So, like we have peer supports for the youth, and then we have parent supports, and then we also include or add like a psychiatrist to the team, a therapist to the team to help address all of the different challenges.
Yeah. So that's great that they're able to merge that. And I think most social workers practice at that kind of intersection of peer support and medical or formal supports. It's definitely something that comes up in developmental disabilities, particularly with the parent support aspect. There are a lot of the efforts, and organizations even are started by parents and have grown out of their advocacy, and now more recently out of self-advocates, advocacy.
There's also an agency that we work with called Families Helping Families. And one of the advocates, she is a mother who has a child who is diagnosed with autism. I think that's where her passion lies, to advocate for other kids, to make sure that they're getting accommodation in schools. It's interesting to see her work, and she's very
I'm actually on the board for Families Helping Families here in Baton Rouge. And so we have 2 advocates there that do educational advocacy work. And that is such a huge need for this particular population, and parents particularly need a lot of support with that. A lot of pressure is put on parents, in advocating for their parents in the education system particularly. And there can be a lot of anxiety that goes along with that too for parents. Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing right by my child? Are they getting all the services that they could? Or the idea that, I really want my kid included, in all of the activities that any other kid would be, and really having to fight for that for their kid because they have an IEP and a disability diagnosis. So, all right. So I'm thinking that these meetings are probably about an hour and a half long. What do you guys think? Because I can see your faces getting a little tired. How are y'all feeling?
I'm always tired, so if I'm no, really I am. So if you see me yawning, it's not for anybody here or talking. That's just something that I do a lot. So I'm here.
I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. Both have stomach bug, flu-like symptoms right now. So
Yeah.
I haven't slept in like 5 years.
Yeah. That's a rough situation to be in. All right. Well, for next week, I've put up your readings and I've put up the activities for next week. So that's all available to you now. I will be working on Module 3. I'm hoping to get these posted a little bit ahead of you guys so that you have some extra, some time to work on these things. But my goal for myself is to have it the Friday before. So that's kind of my internal deadline with that. But I'm hopeful I'll get them up much earlier than that for you. All right. Any questions for me? Y'all get to go do anything exciting? We know what Erin's going to do.
Cook, clean.
I'm going to sleep.
You're going to sleep. Good. I'm also a big proponent of self-care. So Erin, take a nap and then go cook and clean. Because you probably told your family that you're going to be doing this until 4, right? I'm all about you using the rest of this time for self-care. Somehow I magically got my whole family out of my house. So I'm like pretty amazed. I don't know what I'm going to do. Probably work on this class while there's some silence.
I already started the reading and stuff for next week because I actually don't work. I've actually been doing the program full time. It's been my job since 2019. So I'm literally a professional student. So if you see that I posted stuff really early, that's why.
Yep. You're on top of things. Yep. You got your full attention on it. All right. Any questions for me?
Good luck with the house.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, we're making progress. I'm feeling a lot better that we've got a new place that we're staying though. That I'm cool now that we've got a rent house. Thank you. All right. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and stop us for today. And I'll see you guys again next week, hopefully. If you guys have any questions or concerns that come up, don't hesitate to reach out, okay?
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.